Well, it's a great privilege and great honor for me to be here, and I thank you all for coming and for the commission, for the kindness in inviting me, and I thank Dr. Monkol for very kind words in introducing me. Thank you very much indeed. I'm very keen on Q&A, so I'm hoping that there will be time for that. When I thought there was 10 minutes for Q&A and 1 hour for the paper, I tried to change that to make the paper 40 minutes, so we should have a half an hour Q&A. And hopefully we will get round to chatting with each other. The title of my book is The Idea of Justice, but the title of this talk is From Idea to Action. That wasn't chosen by me, but it seemed all right when it was suggested to me, and therefore we went along with it. So I read you first the talk, which should take about 40 minutes, I think. When young Gautama, later known as Buddha, left his princely home in the foothills of the Himalayas in search of enlightenment 2,500 years ago, he was moved by the sight of mortality, morbidity, and disability. He was also distressed by the ignorance he saw around him. When, as a young schoolboy, at Shantiniketan, which Mr. Mongol explained, I first read about this much recollected history, I remember being immensely moved and also, in many ways, energized. Indeed, Buddha's concern and his knowledge-centered approach to confronting difficult problems have been among the major sources of inspiration throughout my life. I should explain, to make it absolutely clear, that I'm not religious, and therefore I'm not a Buddhist or a follower of any other religion. But it is possible to benefit greatly from understanding the sources of Gautama Buddha's agony, and I will later discuss his enlightenment. But the agony first, particularly the deprivations and the insecurities of human life. Even if we have no great inclination to try to follow Buddha's lead in exploring, going beyond that, exploring the ultimate nature of the universe. I'm concerned rather with them in following Buddha's idea at a more worldly level. Indeed, as I've tried to argue in an earlier paper called Buddha and the Modern World, it was first read at a conference in Singapore, arranged in the new Nalanda Srivijaya Center, and later published there. As I argued there, it's easier to draw on Buddha's ideas than that of many, almost any other religious leader, because the story of his life makes him look as if he is very close to us. The ideas that moved him, including the fear of mortality, the tragedy of old age and disability, the terrible impact of diseases on human life, move us too, no matter what religious belief, if any, we may have or intend to pursue. And we too see the dangers of ignorance and of badly organized societies, to which Buddha would give much thought as his own enlightenment proceeded. But no matter at which level we confront these adversities, the focus on knowledge and understanding and on reasoning and enlightenment remains as important in our vastly different world today as it was in Buddha's own time 2.5 millennia ago. What has all this got to do with justice and injustice in the world today? I would argue a great deal. As we consider the challenges of dealing with the colossal problems of human insecurity and social injustice in the contemporary world, the importance of seeking an enlightened approach, informed by reasoning with oneself and with others, remains deeply relevant. Before I move on to discuss the idea of justice, which is the chosen topic for discussion today, let me point briefly to three features of what we can see in secular terms as a critical approach derived directly from Buddha's reasoning, which should be particularly relevant to the engagement with the idea of justice. It is, I should explain, not my claim that these are the most important features of Buddha's thinking. Indeed, my claim is nothing at all as grand as that. But that these features present in Buddha's approach still remain important in thinking, even in completely secular terms today, of right and wrong, and of justice and injustice. The first of the features I want to discuss relates to Buddha's concern with life and living, and not just with institutions, arrangements, and other what we might call organizational features. I shall call this a life-centered approach. It may appear very odd, superficially, that I'm attributing a life-centered understanding of the engagement of reasoning to someone, Buddha, whose priorities are often thought of as being life-denying. He did emphasize the attainment of nirvana, didn't he? But we have to remember that Buddha was motivated to undertake his long search precisely by the agonies and infirmities of human life. And in different ways, he was still dealing with human deprivations, even when he explored the nature of good life and the goodness of the world. In fact, broader than human deprivations of all living creatures. He remained concerned about mortality, about mobility, about disability, about ignorance, and about lack of understanding. This is in sharp contrast with many approaches to justice that can be described in terms of what ultimately counts, what can be described as life-denying. Consider, for example, the approach to the idea of right and the just as articulated by Ferdinand I, the Holy Roman Emperor in the 16th century. Ferdinand I famously claimed, "Fiat justitia et pereat mundus," which can be translated from Latin as, "Let justice be done, though the world perish," unquote. The Holy Roman Emperor's indifference to suffering of living creatures as the world perishes, focusing instead on some abstract idea of rightness, could not have been endorsed by Buddha's reasoning. I note here in passing, since this meeting is concerned with national health, that the life-centered approach to understanding the claims of justice gives us an immediate entry into problems of ill health and the need for social engagement to confront this. I shall come back to this connection later on in this talk. A second striking feature of the approach that emerges from Buddha's line of thinking is its inclusiveness, and I shall call this feature of Buddha's thought as an inclusive approach. There are no exclusions in this approach. If the first feature has a special relevance to Thailand, given its deep commitment to enhancing people's health through informed and reasoned public policy, the second feature relates to issues of divisiveness within the society that has plagued Thailand a great deal in recent years. I'm aware that some commentators would find it puzzling that I'm including Thai Buddhism as a part of a universalist tradition, since it's often presumed, since Buddhism in Thailand is mainly of the Theravada kind, as opposed to the broader Mahayana tradition, which is supposed to include everyone, there cannot be universalism in Thai Buddhism. This, I believe, is a mistake. Since universalism in the social sense that I'm invoking here, is a basic feature of Buddhism in general, which includes the Theravada. The difference between Theravada and Mahayana, and this is not a occasion to discuss that, lie in the more theological territory of salvation, with which I'm not particularly concerned in this talk. Thailand's record of inclusiveness in its health coverage is excellent. Indeed, I would say exceptional. There is an inclusiveness here that even the United States, with its private insurance system, does not yet have. And yet the possibility of inclusive dialogue that unites rather than divides people has been deeply elusive in this otherwise wonderful nation. And this remains a problem in contemporary political scenarios. This is an issue of political importance in Thailand today, but let me address the more general principle of universal inclusiveness first in the tradition of Buddhist understanding of social interaction. I should mention here how pioneering the approach of those inspired by Buddha was very early in the intellectual history of the world. Indeed, some of the earliest open general meetings in the world aimed specifically at settling disputes between people, between different points of view, took place in India in the so-called Buddhist councils, where adherents of different points of view got together to argue out their differences, beginning in the 6th century BC. The first of these councils met in Rajagriha, then the capital of what is now called Bihar, Magadha, and Rajagriha is now called Rajgir, and this was shortly after Gautam Buddha's death. And the second was held about 100 years later in Vaishali, and they went on happening regularly. The last one happened in the 2nd century AD in Kashmir. Emperor Ashoka, who hosted the largest, it was the third, Buddhist council in the 3rd century BC in Patna, then called Pataliputra, which was the capital city of his empire over India. Indeed, he was the first Indian emperor for the whole nation, following the footsteps of his grandfather Chandragupta. In that Buddhist council, Ashoka also tried to codify and propagate what were among the earliest formulations of rules for public discussion, some kind of an early version of the 19th century famous American Robert's Rules of Order. To choose another historical example, in early 7th century Japan, the Buddhist prince Shotoku, who was regent to his mother, Emperor Sukui, produced the so-called Constitution of 17 Articles in 604 AD. That constitution insisted, much in the spirit of Magna Carta, to be signed 6 centuries later in 1215 AD. I quote from the Constitution of 17 Articles. Quote, decisions on important matters should not be made by one person alone. They should be discussed with many, unquote. Some commentators, like Hajime Nakamura, have seen in this 7th century Buddhism-inspired constitution Japan's first step of gradual development towards democracy. The Constitution of 17 Articles went on to explain, I quote again, "Nor let us be resentful when others differ from us. For all men have hearts, and each heart has its own leanings. Their right can be our wrong, and our right their wrong," unquote. A third feature that's worth identifying is the focus on universal responsibility in this line of thinking.